We have had a huge change in human relationships, in the way that our brains are structured, and I think it is absolutely downstream of pornography. About 10% of men will admit that they have committed what would be classed as rape, and a third of men say that they would if there were no consequences. I don't believe transgender children exist. I think essentially they're a fig leaf for a male fetish. That is so insulting. The idea that there's a sort of a lady brain, that's something that's right out the 50s. It's so regressive. I feel kind of sorry, particularly for the young men. They didn't stand a chance.
Hello and welcome to this very special edition of the Daily Expresso. I'm JJ Anisiobi, and today I'm joined by journalist and author Jo Bartosch. Jo, welcome to the studio.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
This is your book, Pornocracy. I've got to say, first of all, I love the cover.
Well, thank you very much. It has nothing to do with it, but I think
What, in a nutshell, is the book all about? For all of our viewers and listeners, in a nutshell, what's the book about? And then I'm going to start hitting you with questions about porn.
Okay. So essentially, I think that we have had a huge change in human relationships, in the way that our brains are structured, and even in the way our laws are made. And I think it is absolutely downstream of pornography and of the introduction of high-speed streaming, which happened sometime in the sort of early 2010s. So that becoming sort of normalised, we've seen a huge change in social attitudes. We've seen a change in sort of sexual norms, and we've even seen changes in laws when it comes to things like gender self-identification, which is straight down the line from pornography. So sort of all of this, it's essentially, we're starting to understand that social media is addictive and that it changes the way we think and that it sort of locks people into cycles of dopamine rewards. Well, pornography is like that, but obviously it's much more powerful because it cements that lesson with an orgasm.
So you write about the impact of porn on children and teenagers. What worries you most about boys' exposure to porn?
So we have seen a huge change in social norms when it comes to what young men in particular believe about equality of the sexes. So whilst everyone sort of goes on about young people being particularly woke, actually we're seeing this generation of young boys, so sort of Generation Alpha, and below, have much more aggressive attitudes. So when there was a survey, it's a couple of years ago now, of young people, so I think sort of Zoomer age, so around about sort of 18 to 25, they were asked, is it legal in the UK to rape your wife? And the majority of them thought it was.
Young people, young men, boys think it's okay to rape your wife.
It's become, and I think that is absolutely because of the attitudes that they see normalised in pornography. So similarly, we see a lot of young women who expect pain and physical violence just to be a normal part of sex. And, that's something that would have been, sexual choking, for example, that was unheard of when I was a young woman.
Yeah.
It was very, very niche. Now, 54% of 18 to 24-year-old women have experienced that. And it's, that's incredibly dangerous because apart from anything else, it can kill you very quickly. You can lose consciousness within 10 seconds. These are dangerous sexual practices that have been normalised by pornography. And the reason why pornography tends towards the extreme and why we end up with this sort of massive change in what's considered normal is that it essentially works like a drug, and men and boys become habituated to it, as do women as well to an extent, but has more of an effect on men and boys.
So you think there is a thing of porn addiction? It's not just an excuse people say.
No, do you know what I did? Before I started writing the book, I thought it was nonsense. I thought it was an excuse. I thought it was just a way to get out of responsibility. And actually, it was my co-author, Rob Jessel, who was like, no, there's something here. And he started digging into it. And now looking at the evidence, I think it is absolutely irrefutable. It is clearly addictive. And the reason I was sort of starting to go into earlier, I think, about is that it works on the basis that particularly men, tend to get inured very quickly to what they're looking at. And they look for something else to give them the next hit, to give them the next sort of level of excitement, if you like. And that's known as a super stimulus. It's something that doesn't occur in nature, or isn't sort of particularly normal. But if you present them with something that is better than, they did experiments like many years ago with where the idea comes from with birds, and they put big painted eggs in their nests, and the mother birds would neglect their actual eggs and would sit on the big sort of fake eggs that were brightly coloured. And essentially it's the same sort of thing that happens. So people are literally bonding with what they are seeing on screen. So they are becoming kind of digital sexuals, if you like. They are becoming detached from like the touch of another person's skin or their smell or any of those sort of like holistic things that are a part of sex.
Yeah.
And the only way then that you can sort of increase is by showing increased violence.
Wow. So there's an episode of Futurama. Stay with me. This is an odd one, but there's an episode of Futurama where they predict that in the future the human race basically starts dying out because men are having sex with robots instead, and it's much easier for them than having to have a proper bond and relationship with a woman. So they just like, no, forget it. We're going to sleep with robots. Do you see that as being something that actually could happen? I know there's been a huge rise in sex toys and all these different devices that men can now have tucked into their bed when they're feeling horny. So do you think that's a realistic thing that could happen?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, everyone's sort of worrying about the birth rate declining. Yeah. Well, today, men on average have sex, around about 11% of men have sex about once a week.
Talk. Don't let my wife see this.
Or they say they do. When it comes to pornography, around about 14% of men watch porn at least once a week. What the figure, interestingly, with women is less than 1%. It's really quite rare for women to watch it every day, or indeed, you know, even on a weekly basis.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we are seeing people being sort of pulled apart. The sex is pulled apart by pornography, because what sort of woman wants to put up with having her hair pulled and being choked and called revolting names?
Yeah.
That's kind of like very off-putting. I think that's also behind a lot of young women deciding that they're non-binary or asexual or whatever, just to kind of escape that horrible stereotype. And when it comes to men, I mean, it's difficult. Relationships are hard. Connecting with people is hard. It's, you know, I can absolutely understand why they're going to retreat, particularly, you know, a porn star or porn actress is never going to laugh at a boy, is she? Whereas, you know, I can see all those sort of insecurities are being played on. So whilst on the one hand I think it's something terrible, I can kind of, you know, I do feel sorry for the young men that are caught up in this very much as well. It's just inhumane at every level.
Now, if you're enjoying this episode and you want more exclusive content from Daily Expresso, you can go to the description below and subscribe to Daily Express. It's just £1 for your first month. £1. If that's not going to convince you, watch this.
What do you do to relax, Lee?
Oh, good question. Currently trying to master splitting the G. Parliament, it's hard to relax. It's hard to switch off. Sort of a public figure people recognise, and you know, it can be a bit much sometimes.
How do the MPs treat you in House of Commons?
You know, you can see what they're thinking.
Yeah.
They're not laughing now.
No.
Because I'm still there.
Well, I want to ask you a question now that's going to really get to the heart of who you are as a person.
That's a little bit unfair.
It's a bit woke, that is, Lee.
Well, it's just like the taste.
Still woke, mate.
What's all this? You know, they've got the Jesus sandals and the shorts on, haven't they? And beards, and that's just the women.
Quick fire. What are your thoughts? Keir Starmer, John Sopel, Robert Jenrick, Kemi Badenoch, David Lammy.
I can't repeat the words. Okay, I will do.
You've also written about porn-made paedophiles. Can you explain that?
Absolutely. So again, because of this effect whereby men get desensitized and they start looking for more and more extreme content, the next obvious step is things that are illegal, things that are forbidden. So we now have had such a massive rise in the number of, essentially, men being caught downloading images of child sexual abuse.
Okay.
We don't even have the prison places for them. 8 out of 10 walk out of the courtroom. They don't get a custodial sentence.
Gosh.
It is that normal. I mean, there's Simon Bailey, one of the sort of, he was a former safeguarding officer at a national level, and he just said, you know, we cannot imprison these numbers of men. We cannot keep up. The legal system can't keep up with the sort of advances in technology that have messed up men's minds to this point. And I spoke to, when I was researching the book, I spoke to sex offender experts, and they were saying that this cohort, if you like, of sex offenders, very different from those from 20 years ago. So like 20 years ago, you would get like the former, do you remember the paedophile information exchange? They had this sort of, so they had this idea about liberating child sexuality, and they were kind of almost perversely proud of what they were doing. Now, the men he sees are really, really deeply ashamed. And it is just a case that what they were looking up ended up escalating, and they know they've done something wrong, and they know it's wrong, but it escalates to the point where nothing else will do it for them.
So is there any meaningful way to shield young boys and girls from porn? In the age of smartphones and We've got the Online Safety Act, right? That's gone through. I think Pornhub have seen a massive decrease in the amount of visits they're getting now.
They have. They've seen a 77% drop to their site,
Okay, so
which
it's
is
working.
great. Yeah, and I do actually think, I'm happy to criticise the government when I get stuff wrong most of the time. But I think in this rare occasion, actually, I think the Online Safety Act and age verification has been really positive. I know there are calls as well to ban young people from social media. And I do actually now think that social media has become so immersed in pornography, because when it comes to sites like OnlyFans, where women essentially monetize their own exploitation, and again, I can understand it's a logical step. If you don't think sex is going to be fun, you might as well make money out of it. I kind of get it. So because that's become so normal, they have to market themselves, which means that social media ends up getting flooded with pornographic content. And then indeed you've got things like Grok, where you can undress women and that sort of thing. So actually, I can see there are some benefits potentially to stopping children having smartphones or stopping them being able to go online. And more broadly than just the porn issue, I also think it would have a massive benefit on their mental health, because we're seeing skyrocketing levels of mental ill health, and I'm pretty damn sure that's, again, something that being basically fragmented and separated from one another because of the online world, I think that's why it's happened.
Some people are going to say that, okay, being choked and spanked might be not your cup of tea, but it's sexual liberation. Some women like it, some men like it. That's just what they're into. Lots of men watch porn and aren't doing those things to women. So what's the big deal?
Well, actually, we know a lot of men are doing those things to women. And when it comes to the baseline of male criminality, or sort of the inclination towards criminality, surveys consistently show that around about 10% of men will admit that they have committed what would be classed as rape. And a third of men say that they would if there were no consequences. So that is absolutely terrifying, when you think, and that's not a kind of one-off study, that is replicated. And so, when you look around at your colleagues, your all the rest of it, your friends, you think, oh my God, it's such a high level of male violence anyway. When you strip away the protective norms of saying, actually, no, it isn't okay to do that, you end up really giving those dangerous men a green light. And I think a lot of women, I don't actually think anyone really wants to have their hair pulled. I don't believe it. And I know that sounds kind of judgmental, but okay, fair enough. People sometimes have kinks, but really, I suspect a lot of it is because that's what they've learned is normal and is okay, but is to be expected because of pornography. So I think separating what we actually want from what we're told we want is really, really difficult. I mean, that's how advertising works.
Yeah.
So, it's really hard. I think if I could do one thing, it would just be sort of reclaiming an authentic sense of sexuality that hasn't been warped by pornography, which has hijacked it. So I think sort of finding out actually what women want, in the sort of old Freudian phrase, is really hard, because our norms have been warped.
Will it not just eventually reset itself? We see with so many things in society, the pendulum swings this way, and then there's an overcorrection, and suddenly everything goes back this way. Do you not think we'll get to a position where these extreme sex things won't be the in thing, and suddenly it's going to be a case of, I don't know, whatever the next gen is, Gen Alpha, but the one after Gen Alpha then says, actually, we're not into that violent stuff. We want just a pure woman who hasn't got any sexual partners, and we're gonna wait till marriage and that kind of thing. Is that possible?
I mean, there is some research out there saying that actually younger people are increasingly turning away from pornography, and obviously as a group who are most likely to be impacted by it, I suspect that's kind of understandable. I think it's a double-edged sword, because, actually I think there should be more options than being sort of barefoot, pregnant and in the kitchen and being essentially on OnlyFans. There are other options.
Yes.
So I think ultimately, right or left, neither really necessarily always thinks about women's interests, which is why I don't think it is necessarily a case of a pendulum swing quite type thing. It's something that is so fundamental to who we are, sex and sexual politics. I kind of think it cuts through that. So I think sort of, sadly, abuse of women, it's never going to stop, but, I don't think just because the Taliban don't have sort of, pornographic posters advertising things, it's an ideal society for women. It's, but it's not an either or. I think there is enough of both.
Yeah, fair. Going back to your comment about OnlyFans, because a lot of my female feminist friends, I've heard them debate this, and they'll be saying things like, but it's empowering. that we're taking the control away from men, and it's women doing it, and we're making our own money, yada 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 yada. I wouldn't want my daughter going on OnlyFans, and I also wouldn't want my son to be subscribing to OnlyFans. But is there an argument when people are saying, well, it gives women the control?
I mean, I kind of refer to that as zombie feminism. I think it's got all the kind of,
I like that. Zombie feminism, very good.
I feel like it has all the sort of, all the buzzwords, but actually it's been totally hollowed out and it's this sort of shambling monster. Yeah, I mean, if it was empowering, frankly, men would be doing it. I mean, it's just not. There is no way that there's anything... no woman, I think, is really empowered by doing that. I mean, they might make a lot of money out of it. And I think somebody like Bonnie Blue, for example, in some way, I mean, I think we should equally criticise all the men that use her.
Yeah.
But also, she saw pornography when she was 11 years old. And I kind of think, when you've been traumatised by that at a young age, when that sort of sets your sexual norm in a way that some people take it that far and to that is kind of understandable. So I kind of think she's both a victim and a perpetrator, which I think is the case with a lot of these sort of very high earning. I mean, most women on OnlyFans earn, I think it's 130, 140 quid a month. It's really not a big earner. So I think it's kind of a complicated one, but essentially, no, I don't think anyone's ever been empowered by getting their boobs out.
Look, I don't see porn going away. I think the genie's out the bottle. It's always going to be there now. So what should change?
I know what you mean. I mean, to be honest, I'm not sure I necessarily think it's ever going to totally go away. I hope it does, and I do think that there are legislative approaches that could help. So, for example, the Nordic model. So that's actually about prostitution, but essentially, if you think of porn as film prostitution, you could apply the same logic, and that's where the women are decriminalised, but the men who pay are criminalised. So I don't necessarily think that could work on its own. Other approaches are something that I think is a really good one, which a professor called Gail Dines came up with, is the idea of considering it a public health crisis. And I think there's something to be said for that, because obviously it doesn't just have mental health impacts, it doesn't just have sort of physical impacts, even when it comes to some of the injuries that women end up with. It also leads to erectile dysfunction in men. So we know that.
Does it?
Yeah. So no, it's true. So prior to sort of the advent of online streaming, for quite a long time, the rate of erectile dysfunction amongst men under 30 was around about 2 to 3%. It's now.
What about men who are 41?
It's now around about a third have problems. And what's really interesting is they can get it up when they're watching pornography, but they can't with a real life partner. So so it is having an impact on people's sort of physical being. Yeah. So I think having it classed as a public health problem could open up a lot of doors to solving it. If you want me to carry on, I don't really want me to carry on. But,
please do carry on.
So something else I think is an idea that I came up with that I just kind of am a bit obsessed with is I really think it would be really helpful if every time a man is convicted of a crime against a woman, even if it's if it's domestic violence, it doesn't have to be necessarily a sexual crime. I think we need to look at his search history. And I think if we were to log that, and they don't routinely do it, I think if the police were to do that, if we were to log it, then we could build up a really good picture, a really good profile of offenders. Because we know, for example, that Wayne Couzens, he was obsessed with pornography. He looked at pornography, which very much mirrored the crime that he committed. And I think if we had that, because it's really hard to research pornography for two reasons. Firstly, it never gets through ethics boards. And secondly, it's really hard to find a sample of the population now who haven't seen it. So just having a control group is really difficult. So if we were to actually use the data that's there and we were to collect that and we were to link it to the crimes that were being committed, that could help us actually develop a profile, which would then, I think, open up other ways of dealing with potentially violent men and filtering them out, for example, of roles working with children.
Yes, of course. Crikey. So with social media being such a, as you say, like an advert for pornography, essentially. I mean, and you're completely right. I can't go on X without scrolling past, and at some point there's a picture of a woman saying, "Hey Grok, take my clothes off," or "Hey Grok, put me in a bikini," or whatever. What would you say to Elon Musk? what would you be telling Elon Musk he must do in order to save the next generation?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? I know he's been very outspoken about having a son who identifies as a girl, and I think it's quite interesting that his son sort of identifies as this really pornified stereotype of what it is to be. You know, he's a model, of course he is, and you know, see him sort of prancing along in a sort of very kind of porny way.
I don't watch porn, so I don't know how a porny way is.
I'm sure you know what I mean there.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
And I mean, obviously, the reason this young lad thinks he's a girl is because of what he's been looking at online. I mean, just that stereotype, and that. So there's a thing called sissification pornography, and again, it's very much sort of addictive. It pulls people sort of algorithmically more and more into what was once something they sort of used or consumed as a medium comes to sort of form who they think of themselves as, and that's so round about sort of. I'm going slightly off track, but before the birth of sort of high-speed internet, around about 2 to 3% of the male population were cross-dressers. Now, pornography has sort of taken that latent urge that a lot of men had, or that thing that they used to keep inside, and now they think it's their identity. And that, I think, is what we are seeing. And I think it's almost become like a human rights struggle. And that is what we are seeing. It's essentially this sort of latent desire and a sort of urge to be kind, not to be judgmental. And then suddenly that's sort of misunderstood as being a trans woman. So I would say, actually, Elon Musk, if there's a role, you've played a part in this. And I think, actually, I think he's done a lot of good when it comes to social media. I also think some of his objections to the Online Safety Act were because of his plans, for example, to have porn on Twitter. So the AI companions that he set up, again, are based on very, very pornographic stereotypes. I think is he worried about the birth rate, which he is. He's always going about the bloody birth rate. Well, if kids are going to grow up sort of having these pseudo relationships with AI, and the Annie, the female character, is kind of like an anime French maid. She's really, really, it's really creepy. And the male one is based, I think, on fan fiction on Edward Cullen, I think, from
Twilight.
So so you've got these sort of really unpleasant archetypes of masculinity and femininity, which I can see are very sort of easy and attractive, particularly if you're kind of a socially awkward kid or whatever. Think, well, what's going to happen to the birth rate? What's going to happen to social media? He's kind of part of the problem there.
Okay. So you think trans women, so men who want to be women, you think a lot of them have gotten there because of pornography that they've consumed?
Yeah, I mean, I've spoken to some who have. I mean, I've spoken,
Jeez.
Yeah, so I've spoken to particularly detransitioners, men, who admitted that essentially what they had was a fetish. And when they were very young as well, there were quite a lot of predatory men out there who sort of convinced them that's what they ought to do. In fact, something that came up, no, I probably shouldn't go there. But yeah, it's again, whilst on the one hand, I think downstream of what they want and what they're doing, it's terrible. And it is a sort of, in a way, it's sort of like meta-pornography, when you end up with women not being able to have any boundaries even in law, when we're not even able to define ourselves, when we're sort of tried on like costumes. That is so insulting. And the idea that there's a sort of a lady brain, that's something that's right out the 50s. You wouldn't, it's so regressive. Yet at the same time, I do sometimes feel kind of sorry, particularly for the young men that are sucked into it, because I can see that in a way they don't stand a chance.
Well, as a journalist, what are some of the maddest trans stories you've come across?
Oh, God. I mean, where to start? I mean, the whole thing is ripe for comedy. I mean, on the one hand, it's kind of grim. On the other hand, it is kind of darkly funny.
Yeah.
I mean, who would have thought sort of 20, 30 years ago that we'd end up with male rapists in women's prisons, or, any of these sort of, it's just grotesque and mad. And something that came out recently with the Epstein files, actually, was that it looks like Jeffrey Epstein was actually funding research into so-called transgender children. Now, I don't believe transgender children exist. I think essentially they're a fig leaf for a male fetish. But there's, I think to make the idea of a trans adult stick, you have to invent the transgender child. And to think that actually somebody who was a trafficker was funding research into this is quite disturbing.
That is. What's your stance on, for example, the red light district in Amsterdam? So obviously, red light district, world famous. sexual attitudes in the Netherlands, full stop, is a bit more liberated, a bit more open, I think, than in Britain. But I've also read that in Amsterdam specifically, they have lower rates of sexual assault on women. Do you think there's a link between? No.
No. So that's known as the sexual hydraulics theory. Is that, you know, if you give men an outlet, whether that's pornography or prostitution, that actually I think what's far more likely is that most of them are migrants who are trafficked in and are not going to bloody report it, are they? Yeah, actually I think the rate of murder within prostitution, I think it's 11 times higher than the general population of women. So it's got an incredibly high murder rate. The rates of PTSD when the women exit tend to be comparable with veterans. It's about 70-odd% who have PTSD. So it is, and I mean, all of these places I think actually in Holland they're starting to roll back on it. And in Germany, certainly, they just become trafficking hubs. I mean, I think it's quite telling that they have to find women from poor countries. Yeah. I mean, when the Ukraine war kicked off, there were loads of, like, if you went on to the punter forums where they all discuss what they want, loads of them were absolutely sort of wringing their hands with joy. They were so happy because, of course, there were a load of Ukrainian women who were desperate and impoverished, and that's how they were going to... So it's so exploitative, and I think that sort of gets glossed over, and there's this sort of empowerment, pretty woman sort of rubbish that kind of is the surface of it. But when you cut underneath it, it's a really grim trade.
Okay, let's talk about Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. So he reportedly had a porn addiction. Yeah. You think that's quite likely that that porn is what made him then become friends with a known paedophile and some of the things that he's been accused of? What's your opinion on all of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting, isn't it? With I was thinking about this when Epstein was arrested. It was 2019, wasn't it, or around about then? So at that time, Pornhub, the world's biggest provider of free pornography, was hosting and monetizing images of child abuse, of rape, and of trafficking victims. And there were even some rape victims who asked them, who repeatedly begged them to take down the content of the footage of their rapes, and they didn't. Oh, God. So, you think, okay, there were these sort of elite, and they were monetizing it. So you got these sort of elite groups of abusers and paedophiles working on the one level. On the other level, you've got this sort of like international huge business that's monetizing exactly the same thing. So I do think that there's something fundamental there about the behaviour of the worst men. And now, obviously, the online world makes it much easier for them to find one another. And I guess when they were, Andrew Mountbatten, he's so smug and overconfident, he's so sort of wealthy, he just thought there wouldn't be any consequences. And I dare say the same went for Epstein, I dare say the same goes for a lot of these men. So, you take away those sort of the guardrails that keep in check behaviour of most normal people, and, endless amounts of money will do that, I think. Yeah. And you have all of those unpleasant things replicated. But I guess, in a way, whilst it's horrible, I'm depressingly not at all surprised. Yeah. That's kind of like what happens when you give free rein to really dangerous men. There's
another story about Andrew going to Hong Kong for a work trip, and in one weekend, he reportedly slept with 40 prostitutes. So now, and again, we spoke about this on this show, when the allegations first came out, and so many of the comments were saying, "Well, what's wrong with that? It's just a guy having a good time. It's just that's just what he's into." A few were saying he's a misogynist and he's a creep, but a lot of attitudes towards it were just, it's just a guy. Well, that's what he's into. Let him play.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting earlier. I meant to sort of push back a bit earlier when you said the attitudes in Holland were more liberal. I think actually, it's quite often seen as a matter of being liberal. I don't think it is liberal. I don't think there's anything liberal about seeing women as products that can be bought. I think actually that's the antithesis of being liberal. I think that's really, really dangerous and an unpleasant sort of way of viewing women. Now, we know that, for example, with pornography, about 90%, according to a Swedish survey last year, 90% of women in the sex industry suffer childhood sexual abuse. And it's very, very common for women in the sex industry, in all branches of the sex industry, to have experienced childhood sexual abuse, and they go into it as a way of sort of rationalising what happened to them. Sometimes it's because they develop drug and alcohol problems, which keep them trapped there, but it is vanishingly rare that you actually have a woman who makes an informed decision to go into the sex industry. So those 40 women, yeah, I mean, you can guarantee that some of them will essentially have been replaying the trauma, and indeed may well have not had a choice about doing it at all.
Okay. Jo Bartosch, thank you so much. Very fascinating. Pornocracy is out now. It's available on Amazon.
It is, yep.
It's a fascinating read. Buy it, read it to your sons, read it to your daughters. Would you say so?
Depends how old they are.
Well, I don't mean your 5-year-olds. But thank you very much. And thank you for watching the Daily Expresso. Leave your comments below, like, share, and subscribe. Bye-bye.